here's what we're going to talk about. If you're just joining us and you weren't here with us last week we talked about the good of David, and tonight, I'm sorry, we're talking about the bad and the ugly. So, Debbie Downer here. But I think there is a lot of things to take with us. So here's the deal. What we're going to talk about today is David allowing, I would say, dark seeds to be planted in his heart, in his soul, whatever you want to say. And they are things that are maybe culturally appropriate, like things that nobody says are wrong, things that he doesn't bat an eyelash to. And if you were to read 2 Samuel, you would pick up on this theme. The theme is more or less this, that every time 2 Samuel tells you that David inquired of the Lord, or David went and worshiped and he sought the Lord, or he asked his wise men for discernment, very soon after those statements, it'll say things like this: and everything that David touched worked out for the glory of God. He fought another battle and they won for the glory of God. Is it any wonder that when you pursue God, when you submit yourself to him, things go well? Every time those statements start to disappear, things start to go really, really south. How many of you have heard the phrase, it takes twice as long to build bridges you burned? Anybody ever heard that phrase before? People say it only takes a few people to destroy something that took a large group of people decades to build. And this can happen when sin enters our lives, these little seeds, and they're not always these outwardly giant things that we think like, oh, I probably shouldn't do meth right now. Sometimes they're just, you know what, I'm just participating in a little gossip, and those little seeds begin to grow. I don't know too many people. I don't think I know anyone, and I know a lot of people in church communities and outside that have histories of addiction issues. Maybe you know some of them. I don't know any single person that was like, one time when I was 15, I went to a party and I injected heroin. I don't know a single person who that's their story. It always starts with a little thing and it slowly grows. And sometimes we use these big giant examples, and we're going to read a giant example tonight. I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about David. Fully socially acceptable is just going to start collecting wives, because that's what kings do. And that seems to be the vice that David loves. And so he just starts collecting wives, and nobody ever calls him on it. Nobody ever tells him that, hey, wait a second, back in Genesis, it says that marriage is for one man and one woman. Nobody points out that in Deuteronomy, God says a king should not take many wives. Most Hebrew scholars say the debate is, what does many mean? David seems to think that right off the bat, he could just get 6 more and keep adding. And those are the seeds, because no one says that's wrong. Every king in the region has multiple wives. There's people in Israel that have multiple wives. But that seed grows all the way to Bathsheba. And it grows and it blossoms and it turns into dark, nasty, terrible fruit. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about these little things that we don't even bat an eyelash at. We just live our lives and we do what's expected of us maybe. And really here's where we're going to land. Every little thing, everything that we do is to be an act of worship unto God. What does the New Testament say? To offer yourselves as living sacrifices. And when we don't do that, these little things can get into our lives and they can grow. And so I was thinking tonight about where we would start. And it's been a couple weeks since I went back into my great expansive knowledge of 1990s films. And so here's where we're going to start. Arian's going to hit play here in a second. We're going to start at one of the greatest movies ever made, Toy Story, of course. And I want us to see what it looks like for these little seeds to grow. And so let's watch this clip about Woody allowing jealousy to get into his heart and into his life. Okay, if you haven't, you need to go watch Toy Story. You can't live your life in America in 2025 and not have seen Toy Story. It's a playful, fun way to talk about what we're going to talk about. What we're going to talk about is not playful and it's not fun. But here's the deal. I think Jesus is much more masterful than anyone else at using these agricultural metaphors for how life works. And he's living in an agricultural world. But I think we get the point. You could plant a seed and it can grow poison oak. You could plant a different seed and it can grow figs or apples. And I think spiritually speaking, we are planting seeds in our lives all the time. And this is what I want us to know, and this is really what I want us to see, is we're going to talk about something that from our culture, looking at David's culture, looks like red alert galore. But in reality, we have to step back and we have to recognize this one thing. It's that David is not doing anything that was culturally unacceptable. He's not doing anything that would have been like, red alert, the king of Israel cannot do this. There might be some gray area he's living in, but nobody outwardly looks at what David starts doing and says, this is sinful behavior, you have to stop immediately. And so this is what I want us to know. There are things in our lives that nobody will tell us not to do. If we're not submitted to the Lord, or we're dependent on someone else to tell us what to do, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a pastor, if it's anything other than an ongoing relationship with the Lord, we will plant nasty seeds. Here's the good news, is God is also in the business of uprooting them and clearing them out of our lives, but sometimes that's a really, really messy process. So we're going to jump in. This is a little context for us. This is 2 Samuel chapter 3, and this is where this long, slippery path begins for David. And we're going to make some notes of the crash and burn along the way. Anybody ever drive that highway that when you go into Ensenada in Mexico and you go east to the Ojos Negros Valley? Has anybody ever been out there before? It's like this cliff on one side, and it's super winding. And you're out in the middle of nowhere. Some of the road is just collapsed in, so sometimes you go around a blind corner, you have to be in the other lane. If you've ever been on it, you know one thing. Every time you look down a steep turn, what do you see down there? Burned out cars. And it's sad and it's terrible, but we're going to make note of some of the burned out cars on the road that David's been on. So here's chapter 3. You have it in your outline. It says this: there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. It's just making note of the crown has passed from Saul to David, and now there's kind of these conflicts arising over all the people who are kind of left behind from Saul's rule and reign, and they're trying to hold on to their power and authority, and David's guys are now taking over authority. And then verse 2, and sons were born to David at Hebron. That's interesting. By the way, if you're reading through the story, it really is broken up right here. Like, this is supposed to stand out. It ruins the flow of the story, and it's there to ruin the flow of the story because it ruins the flow of David's life. So, sons were born at Hebron. Okay. His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam of Jezreel. You don't need to know who these people are. Just know that that's one of his wives. And his second, Chileab of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. Just for a side note, if you want to know, Absalom actually is going to murder Amnon in like a few chapters. He's just going to murder him. Well, some people would say just murder. Some people would say he's revenge killing because Amnon actually rapes his half-sister. So Absalom kills him. It's very complex when there's 6 or 7 wives in the royal palace and all the kids are half-siblings, isn't it? Verse 4, and the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and the fifth, Shephidatha, the son of Abital, and the sixth, Ithream of Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. So I tried to give you, I think, in your outline, a little description of who these people are. David has previously married a handful of people before we learn of these people. Michal, who's not in this list, we're going to learn about her in a bit. Michal was David's first wife, and she is the daughter of, anyone know? Saul. When Saul and David start in conflict, what is the petty thing that Saul does, like right away? Well, I'm taking your wife from you. So he takes her back, and he marries her off to another man in his royal court. And at this point, they've been married for like 10 plus years. Okay, that's what I want you to know. Ahinoam of Jezreel. David took her as he was gaining wealth and fame back in 1 Samuel 25. Abigail, the widow of Nabal. Nabal was an enemy of David who died by their military force, and he took her as his wife too. And then here's a description of the 6 sons that we learned. Amnon raped his half-sister and was murdered by his half-brother. Chileab is also known as Daniel in 1 Chronicles, and the few mentions indicate that he either died young or he was ungodly and unworthy, and they just wrote him out of the history. Absalom first murders his half-brother, and then he leads a civil war. I was talking before class tonight that Absalom actually makes David flee Jerusalem because he raises up such a strong power. He's totally content murdering his own dad to get the throne. Quality people David's raising up there. Adonijah tried to seize the throne from David, and then David's appointed successor, and then he tries to take one of David's concubines, but then he gets executed for being arrogant. And then the other two sons, they either die young or they also had kind of a meaningless life as far as the history of Israel is concerned. So this is the family of David. Do we see the seeds of, you know what? It's socially acceptable to have a bunch of wives. Not only is it socially acceptable, all the other pagan kings do it as a sign of their power and their might. So David just says, I'm going to do it. And now we're starting to see, how many of you would say if this was the fruit of the life I was living, I would take a little bit of stock of my life and say, you know what, I need to change some things. Not David. This picks up in verse 12. And Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, to whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you, and bring over all Israel to you. And he said, good, I'll make a covenant with you, but one thing I require of you. That is, you shall not see my face unless you bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. Now remember, this is David's first wife. She was taken from him by Saul, remarried to another man, and we're going to find out that she's not just remarried, she's happily remarried, and she has a family. David says, I'm not making any covenants with anybody about land until I get my first wife back. So what is he ultimately doing? He's just tearing apart another family. Why? Because he wants another wife. So here's what happens. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Gross, creepy story. You could read about it in 1 Samuel if you missed the sermon. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, Paltiel, the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping after her all the way. And Abner said to him, go, return. In Hebrew, it's a sharp, like, get the heck out of here. She's David's wife now. And he returned. So David, his drama is not enough. He also wants to reunite with this other first wife that had been taken from him. Breaks up a family unit for it. There's a scene that comes, and we're not going to talk about it, but how many of you have heard the phrase, dance like David? I want to become more undignified than this, says David. And what does he do? He dances in like a super socially unacceptable way in his worship of God. Part of that story tells us that Michal, his wife, sees him dancing, and she basically lets out all of her resentment and rage towards him for what she did to him. That you could just dance before the Lord in your worship and never be responsible for what you've done to me. Okay, we got the point. That's in 2 Samuel 6, by the way, if you wanted to read it. Okay, we're going to do a discussion question right now, and it's in your outline, but I'll read it to you. While it's not illegal, David lives up to the standard of pagan kings of his day, and he takes on wives without any submission to the Lord. So here's one of those sections. He doesn't say, God, should I take on another wife? He just takes them. In this sense, the world around David would have accepted the practice and considered it entirely normal and not out of the ordinary. While we can see and anticipate the dark seeds of David's life growing into brazen sin, when it happens in our own lives, we often don't recognize it, or we explain it away as not that big of a deal. Show of hands if you're bold enough. How many of you have ever had a sin issue that grows out and your first response is, oh my gosh, I know where that started. I didn't notice it when it started, but I notice it now. Maybe when you were like younger, like a lot of years ago, nothing like recent or anything, like a long time ago. Anyone? Oh, cool. Cecil and Jimmy, they're going to heaven. They're humble servants of the Lord. So here's the question. What would you consider some of the common dark seeds that can be planted in the hearts of Christians with little or no pushback? What are those seeds? Describe the process of their growth from seed to full-fledged dark fruit. How have you experienced the turmoil of this because of the choices of others? So maybe you've experienced this, the choices of others. You're just a child in David's court. You didn't get to decide that your dad took your mom as fourth wife and you're like the 17th child, right? You just are experiencing the world that other people's sinful choices. What does that feel like? What was that for you? And then this is the personal question. How have you experienced this because of your own sin choices? If you're not ready to go there, maybe you just met, that's okay with me. I would encourage you to do it. So why don't we shuffle the deck a little bit? You are free to stand up, move about the cabin. How about groups of 4, 5, 6, something like that? Have at it, and we have plenty of time tonight, so we're going to take about 12, 15 minutes. I would love if a couple people were willing to share any element of that question, any level of your comfort sharing. I would love it if somebody was wanting to share something that you heard, something that you said, or maybe you can encourage a group member that said something powerful to you to just restate it for the rest of the group. Would anyone like to jump in? Mm-hmm. Just let it linger till it's awkward. I knew somebody would give in.
I don't know how much you knew, but when we were talking about a process of where the seed becomes this full-fledged dark fruit, Carl and I were talking about, okay, so in our relationship, sometimes you say things, we're never on the same page always. Like that's oh, sorry.
Yeah, there we go.
Gosh, you're giving me this idea like Andy had. Like, I don't like to speak in front of people now. All right. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you, right?
Tell them and tell them and tell them again.
So we were talking about our relationship. In marriage, it's very difficult to be on the same page, same chapter, same book at any given point. And when you start to recognize we have different processes, then sometimes that little seed of, oh, you're not seeing it my way, frustration builds. And then that frustration can sometimes become resentment. It can be bigger and it can get more damaging. And I think we've experienced how we handle that, and that becomes very toxic, and then your relationship is no longer what it started out to be. And I think that was all I was going to say about that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for breaking the ice. I love your example because we're going to talk about David and Bathsheba, but I think one of the great impediments to this real conversation is to think, well, I didn't rape my way to adultery, therefore my stuff's not that big of a deal. But I love what you said, that just like the frustration can be the seed that grows into resentment. Because I think that's an experience every human being has at some point. Would anyone else like to share? All right. I'm going to go Arian and then Gary.
Yeah, one thing that was brought up in our group, I'm not going to share too much, but just thinking about the whole dark seed concept of that getting planted. And when you think about when we have the fruit of the Holy Spirit in our life, that's the evidence of a godly seed being planted within us. So, so then if you think of, well, then what is the fruit of the dark seed? Well, it's probably the exact opposite of whatever the fruit of the Holy Spirit is. So then one thing Jimmy had mentioned was one thing that comes up is just the lack of God's peace in our lives when that dark seed is planted. And so even though we might be doing things that we don't think are going to affect others, it's the fact that we have the lack of God's peace within us that ultimately does spread out and does start affecting our family and our kids and among other things. So yeah, it's just something that can grows and grows within us over time. and then disrupts everyone else around us.
Yeah, that resonates with me for sure. Gary, right behind you, he's handing you the mic.
We talked about two or three kind of similar concepts, and I think we were trying not to have to air all our dirty laundry in public. So we came up with some pretty tame ones. The first one I thought about was telling white lies. And a lot of times as a child or a teenager, maybe you kind of tell white lies, and they're not a big thing, and they're kind of culturally acceptable. And I guess I say that because you can say, well, you asked me, like if my wife asked me, well, how do you like this dress? Oh, it looks nice. I don't tell her, oh, it makes you look fat, or it's not a good color. You know, you just...
You know she's sitting right next to you, right?
Maybe I'm digging a hole here. Help me out.
Hold it right up to your mouth.
Yeah. So anyway, it was just how that kind of grows. It's subtle, but at some point, the white lies get more tainted and more black, and you tell bigger lies, and usually they will come back to hurt you or haunt you, and you have to kind of recognize. And quite frankly, he was talking about when you become a Christian and you have the Holy Spirit living within you, you start getting a check. I could have been more diplomatic and said, well, it's nice if you like it, I don't know, that kind of thing. But so that was one. Then we started talking about, and we've all talked about this in recent weeks or years here, listening to television shows with foul language. And, 15 or 20 years ago, in nighttime TV, you didn't hear cuss words, and you didn't hear or see homosexuals kissing each other and so on and so forth. But when it first starts out, you're kind of shocked, but well, it was just one scene, and it's really a good show, and everybody's watching the show. And so you kind of go along with it. And then it just kind of creeps in where it's just, you're just accepting that. And again, until you really get the Holy Spirit in you and you start realizing, I don't want to be this way. This is not pleasing to God. And you try to change your way. So there are a lot of kind of what might seem like benign examples that we've probably all experienced, gone through, or whatever. So it doesn't have to be taking on 3 or 4 wives and that type of thing to be something that can really take a seed in you.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. As I was preparing, I was thinking of the New Testament has this example. Jesus is talking about the mustard seed. You said the word, sometimes it starts as benign. I guess the negative of the mustard seed is, what are these little tiny things that just look like absolutely nothing? The positive example is Jesus says the mustard seed is the smallest of all the seeds, but when you plant it, it grows into a tree that can house many birds, right? That's so often these things are subtle, they're small, they're just frustration. I'm just a little frustrated all the time until I now resent you, right? I think one of the things, the characteristics of sin is that sin is seeking destruction and death. And so I think one of the things about sin is sin always swells to its boundaries until it finds its destruction, whether it's going to ruin a relationship or kind of like get you thrown out of a friend group. Maybe you get caught in a lie and you're fired from your job. Sin always has a way of expanding. Sometimes certain seeds grow very slowly and you don't notice because they haven't broken the surface yet. Some of them grow really quickly. There's certain choices that you could make that would probably end your marriage, for instance, like very quickly, right? There's other choices that take decades to kind of like grow, and maybe it doesn't even end your marriage. Maybe it's just like you sit in the same room every night and you don't even talk to each other. And that's the destruction. But it's something that God has intended for good that is slowly becoming pressed out against the boundaries of destruction. I always use this example. I've used it 100 times. The human is made in God's image, and so we have some capacity to fight back through willpower, not for long, And we also have the Spirit of God that sees us and says we are very good, but that's not the case for all of creation. So I always use this example. The demoniac, when the demons are cast out of him, they go into the pigs, which do not have the capacity of the human made in God's image, and they immediately self-destruct. There's no resistance in them because they're pigs, not humans, and they literally just topple right over the cliff and die. That is the intention of dark, demonic, sinful things. We are made in the image of God, and so there's a resistance in us. But that's ultimately what it's trying to do. It's trying to topple you off of a cliff. With that, as we're talking about all these beautiful things, I have a second clip because Woody is Andy's favorite toy. And then Buzz shows up and he's no longer his favorite. And those suspicious thoughts, those jealous thoughts turn into murderous, let's eliminate Buzz Lightyear thoughts. And so this is where the dark seeds of jealousy end up. So there it is. Turns into, as they say, murder. Turns out if you've actually seen the movie, spoiler alert, he's not dead. They reunite. That's why they make Toy Story 2, 3, and 4. But I wanted to point out a couple things, and even though it's silly, I think it's important, because if you were watching the clip, you would know that Woody wasn't actually trying to get Buzz knocked out of the window, was he? He was just trying to get him knocked down behind the desk so that when Andy came back to pick one toy, he had no choice to pick him. But sin has a way of growing out and causing kind of ripple effects that you didn't even expect to happen. So even if the intention is, hey, I just want him to fall down in there, now he's in Sid's yard, and if you know about Sid is the boy who disassembles toys and then rebuilds them with erector sets, and they're like basically little demon toys. So that's not his intention. His intention is just, I want to be the favorite again. If you have more than one child in your home, like I do, you know that each child is always competing for attention, and they're always trying to figure out if they're the favorite. Even if they have to push one back behind the desk, they'll do it when you're not watching. And so this is what happens in the story of David. It says in chapter 11, so we got these seeds. David has collected these wives. There's family turmoil. All of his children, which are mostly half-siblings with one another because there's so many moms. They're starting all these conflicts. They're growing up. And this is what happens. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel. That's a good thing to underline, all of Israel. So he sent away all the fighting men. And they ravaged the Ammonites, and they besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. So here's what's going on. David has fought and won many, many battles. He has incredible fighting force around him. And for the first time in David's history that we know about, he decides, I'm going to sit this one out, fellas. We don't know if he has something in mind. We don't know if he's exhausted and needs a break. How many of you know that sometimes when you're exhausted, those little seeds grow faster? Yeah. Sometimes when you're in a setting or a place where you feel like nobody's looking in at me, all the fighting men are gone, that little seeds can grow faster. That's exactly what happens to David. So it says that they're basically succeeding in all that they do. And I love how the verse ends. But David remained at Jerusalem. So the image is this isolated guy in the palace all by himself. Nobody watching over him. And he's just hanging out in the life of luxury. How many of you know there are lots of sins that in isolation, those are the place that those sins love to grow? I think it's one of the reasons why Christians traditionally have always encouraged accountability, whether it's one single friend or a group of people, is that there are a lot of sins that want to push you towards the cliff of destruction that happen in isolation. When they happen in isolation, it's very tempting to leave them there. After all, nobody has to know. And so it happened in verse 2. Late one afternoon, when David arose from his couch, he was walking on the roof of the king's house, and he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. Let's pause right there, because if you know anything about David, David has extreme strength. He's a man that the people love. He's a great military commander. We learned last week that he's really good at saying, you know what, Saul wasn't the best guy to me, but let's honor the past. These are all highlights of David's life. But if there's one thing that we already know about David, it's that he likes women. Is that true? Turns out that's exactly true. So when the Bible tells us that there's a woman bathing and she was very beautiful, the first thing before the Bible even tells you what's going on, what's your assumption? David, you turned and went back inside to close the door. No. Verse 3. And David sent and he inquired about the woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? I want to pause here for a second because I put it in the footnote. I think it's footnote number 3 here. I didn't know this, but many Jewish scholars think that this is a rhetorical question. So when he says, hey, who is that woman? And they say, isn't it Bathsheba? What he's really doing is he's trying to throw the scent off the trail because it turns out he likely already knew her. And he likely already knew of her. And if he knew her and he knew of her, what are the chances that he knows she lives down over there? And if he already knows her and it's saying that he thinks she's beautiful, he probably already thought that. Now, these are all conjectures. The Bible doesn't say that, but here's some things to consider. The first is she's married to Uriah the Hittite, who it turns out is one of the mighty men of David. So David definitely knows him. She is the daughter of Eliam, who is also one of David's mighty men. That's from 2 Samuel 23. And her grandfather, we're going to learn later, is this name I can't pronounce, Ahithophel, who is one of David's most trusted counselors. He goes to him for wisdom. So what are the chances that David totally gets caught off guard and doesn't know who this woman is? I don't know. It's more than 0. That's what I would say. So he sees her, and he says this, go inquire who this is. And one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers, and ready for this wording? This is pretty accurate in Hebrew. They took her. And she came to him, and he lay with her, which is biblical innuendo. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house. I'll pause right here. Now there are some kind of old school commentaries that say, like, well, maybe she's a little bit at fault because she doesn't fight back. There's examples in this book, 2 Samuel, where like rape happens and the women fight back, but Bathsheba doesn't. I'm not an expert on Bathsheba and David, but my understanding is that David, in his position of power, is not somebody that you say no to. That's my opinion. My opinion is that what I read is this is an unwanted advance that turns into what we call rape. That's what I would say. The second thing that I think is important, you see these brackets, and it says, now that she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Now this seems really strange, but it's actually a very important note in the Bible. What it's saying is that she just ended her period. And the reason this is really important is because in just a second, she's going to conceive a child. What the Bible is trying to unequivocally tell you is this child only has one possible father. There's no other potential. It wasn't a child that was, 3 weeks ago conceived and maybe there's some confusion. What it's trying to tell you is there's 100% unequivocal, this is David's child. This is a world without DNA tests and all those sticks that women pee on. And the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. How many of you would say, like, that's an oopsies? Yeah. Not the intention. Clearly not what she wanted, and definitely not what he wanted. Now, that's us coming from our culture. In this culture, Leviticus 20 says, if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Ooh. Now, the Jews don't always follow the Levitical law, so I'm not saying that this would 100% happen if people found out. All I'm saying is both of them are well aware that this is the law, And now all of a sudden, that little thing that kind of sprouted up as he took more and more wives that were socially acceptable, and he gave himself into this sin of lust, and he stayed behind in isolation, and then he acted out on it in this like very violent, terrible way, now has the fruit and the evidence of his sin. And she conceived. So I think here's the point here. If we're taking notes, I'm watching the time. There are times in David's life where he makes mistakes in 1 and 2 Samuel, and when he makes those mistakes and he's connected to the Lord, guess what it says he does almost immediately? He offers a sacrifice, he pursues a priest, he asks for forgiveness, he confesses his sins. Everybody on the same page? This particular sin's fruit is very dark, and we don't see that side of David at all. Instead, David comes up with a plan that turns into a threefold plan to get himself out of any responsibility, remove any kind of criticism or critique upon him, and this is what it looks like. This is verse 6. So David sent word to Joab, who is the commander at the front lines where David is supposed to be. Send me Uriah the Hittite. If you're taking notes or you have an outline, you should circle the word the Hittite. This is important. He is not a Jew. He is not raised in the ways of the Torah. He is a foreigner who's become, has an allegiance to Israel, who's risen in the military ranks. He probably started as like a gun for hire, proven himself worthy, gotten land and all of these things, but he's not Jewish. And here's why it's important. Because we're going to find out, and I think the Bible wants you to know that he's a Hittite, because he could have just told you his name is Uriah. We're about to find out that Uriah, the foreign Hittite, has more integrity and character and knows the ways of the Lord better than the king of Israel. And so Joab, he agreed. He sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how all the people were doing. And hey, how's that warrior fighting going? Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. Wash your feet means go through the rituals of go on in your house. You've been away from home for a while. Your wife probably misses you. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. The king's trying to butter him up. Go home, be with your wife. What is the insinuation here? Go home and sleep with your wife, so I can get off the hook that the baby's mine. This is like a Jerry Springer. You guys remember that show? Jerry. Before I was a Christian, I watched that sometimes in the summer when my mom wasn't watching. And then they would always do the, you are not the father. But they didn't have that test when David was alive. So, but Uriah, verse 9, he slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord. He didn't go down to his own house. Well, why didn't he do that? Verse 10 tells us, when they told David, Uriah did not go to his house, David said to Uriah, you notice how they're not calling him Uriah the Hittite now? Now they're just calling him Uriah. Have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. What is he saying? The presence of God is elsewhere. The people I serve with and the people who serve under me, they're out living in a field in tents. It's not right for me to live in luxury even for a night or two while the people I belong to are doing this battle. So he says, the ark and the Israel, they dwell in booths. They're camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. This is not even an option for me, he says. I'm not doing that. So, plan number one, just get him to go home so I can deny that the child's mine. Has it succeeded or failed? It's failed. So David is going to turn to another trick that some of you know. There is, for all of human history, something called alcohol that makes people's inhibitions lower and they make poor choices. Would you agree? Some of you would agree from experience. Some would, you've just seen others do it. So then David said to Uriah, okay, that's fine. Remain here today also, and tomorrow I'll send you back. So just hang out with me for the day. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next, and David invited him, and he ate in his presence, and he drank, so that he made him drunk. This is an important point. So who made Uriah drunk? David made sure of it. Okay, so now he's drunk. And in the evening, he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but he still didn't go down to his house. So I think there's some insight here, because when somebody makes a plan to try to backstab or manipulate someone else, I think the experience they draw on is, what would it take for it to work on me? So David says, I'll get him wildly drunk. Then he'll make some choices that maybe he's not as virtuous, maybe not as character-driven, maybe not a man of integrity when he's drunk. And he's still more virtuous than David. Still doesn't budge. Verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, and he sent it, ready for this? By the hand of Uriah. So he's writing a letter, sealing it with the king's seal, handing it to Uriah, and saying, you're going to go back to the battlefront and deliver this letter. It is against the law for Uriah to open the letter. It's not to him. But what is the letter about? In the letter he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. He had to deliver the news that he needed to be murdered by his own hand. This is the sick, twisted irony, and it calls back to the fact that David sent all men to the battlefront and he was all alone. Who's the only person that can bring the letter? Uriah. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting, and he instructed the messenger, when you have finished telling all the news about the fighting to the king, then if the king's anger rises and if he says to you, why did you go near the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubasheth? Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? This is hearkening back to a story where someone threw a large stone off a wall and crushed somebody. Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. There was once a time in David's life that we learned about on Sundays where he feared the anointing of God on Saul so much that even when Saul was right before him and was easy pickings, he had the integrity to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Now he premeditates and murders Uriah the Hittite. So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger... I'm going to skip over to verse 26. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. It doesn't tell us, but there's got to be some element of her suspicion of why that may or may not have happened. So now she's pregnant with a child that she didn't intend to have with a man that wasn't her husband, and now her husband is dead. There she finds herself. And it says that she lamented over her husband. Well, yeah, that makes plenty of sense. In verse 27, and when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her into his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. This is kind of where I want to wrap up and end before we go into a second discussion. What David does is culturally the thing that somebody showing mercy on a widow would do. A widow would largely be assigned to a male relative to care for her unless she was remarried to somebody else, which was seen as like a great honor, that somebody would say, I will take care of you, I will take care of whatever children you might bring into our relationship. And so what David is doing, I guess let's paint it this way. The vast majority of people, other than maybe the servants who went and got Bathsheba that night, have no idea any of this has happened, correct? Most people know that Uriah the Hittite is a well-known commander in the military, and he's died, and he's left a widow, a pregnant widow behind. How terrible, how sad. And the king, our great king, in his merciful ways has said, you can come into the royal house and I will take care of you forever. I am not an expert. I just know enough to be dangerous. But I know that when somebody has been violated and there's great trauma, making them marry that person is probably a pretty miserable place to live. So here she is. She's pregnant with a man who violated her, and now legally she belongs to him. And David, in this situation, presents it to the world that he is the merciful good guy. Very heavy. And I think here's an encouragement for you. Most Hebrew scholars, even before the time of Jesus, pointed out that Psalm 32, if you want to write it down, you can look it up in your free time. Psalm 32 appears to be written by David at this time. David will be confronted in the next chapter by Nathan, you may recall. Sets him up with a little story that gets David fired up, and then he says, you're that guy. You're that terrible guy. The end of this story is also pretty terrible. Bathsheba gives birth to a son who ends up dying in infancy. It's very sad. The redemptive part of the story is Bathsheba will bear another son, and his name will be Solomon, who the Bible will tell us will become the wisest of all kings. So here's the discussion question. We'll take it 10 minutes or so, and then I'll just pause, end, and then we'll do some prayer together. While lust turning into adultery and murder may not be a common experience for the majority of people, the process of allowing socially and culturally accepted things into our lives without submitting them to the Lord happens so often that we sometimes don't even notice until the seed has sprouted. Whether it's the seed of jealousy or comparison turning into hatred and resentment, bitterness and trauma turning into addiction or self-destructive behavior, or something else, the Bible is clear. To walk in step with the Spirit requires us to submit our entire lives as an act of worship unto God. Anyone who's followed Jesus for a long time knows that the call is to do it every single morning. Every morning is new. Committing to the Lord 2 years ago is awesome, and we should remember the day, whether it was a decade ago or 40 years ago, but that one singular decision is a decision that needs to be repeated daily. So here's the quote. This is from Charles Spurgeon. You know what? You can read the quote together, and then you can see the group discussion there. I won't waste our time from up front. So why don't we take the final 10 minutes or so. You can read this Charles Spurgeon quote, and then the group discussion, and we'll bring it back together in about 10 minutes. Ready to go. In fact, I feel like there's a great temptation teaching this to let's throw in the birth of Solomon and how much of a blessing he becomes, just to end with a bow on top a little bit, kind of. But we're not going to do that. The nature of sin is that it's dark and it's heavy and it crushes people under its weight. And I think when we let that linger and we acknowledge that, maybe pride has gotten in the way of understanding how big of a deal sin is. Maybe it's gotten in the way of how quickly I confess, if I do at all, if I even see things as a sin. And we kind of let that linger, because I think part of what God's word is a lamp and a light, but it's also a sword, and it hurts. It hurts sometimes in a good way. Have you ever seen somebody cut a tree down? They just cut it down, by the trunk. And then you've seen someone do it the right way, where they really get way down in there and take the roots out. It's like a much, much longer, more advanced process, isn't it? It hurts. But I want to tell you one thing, something I think we shared back in the series about the 7 deadly sins, and it's something that came up a long time ago that was very helpful for me, especially when I was a youth pastor, because it's no surprise at all. The most common thing in youth group that you hear is porn is so readily accessible. It's everywhere. And so you would get a lot of... I want to be free of this. What do I do? And I think this is true of all sins as we confess them, and I just wanted to leave you with something tangible. I learned it as like the breadcrumb theory. You guys know what breadcrumbs, the idea of breadcrumbs, you leave a breadcrumb to the thing. So often we can just use this example of I guess we'll use the example of like internet pornography, right? It's like, if that's the end, that's where the breadcrumb trail leads to, so often the prayer and the desire is, I want to be rid of that thing, but nobody ever says, hey, have you ever evaluated the breadcrumbs that were all along the way? Was it an insinuation in a song you heard? Maybe cut all that out. Was it maybe the TV series that you're binge watching late at night every night that's got suggestive content, or a storyline that's like really got you intrigued? And in your mind, you might think, well, that's not that big of a deal. It's this pornography viewing that I want out of my life. But really, that's just another breadcrumb trail along the way. Maybe it's where do your eyes go when you talk to certain people? Like, okay, now we're picking up breadcrumbs and we're throwing them in the trash. And I feel like this is like if there's resentment towards a person, when their name comes up in conversation and they're not around, do you add a little thing of gossip in there? That's a breadcrumb, like remove it, right? And so often if you're struggling in a sin and you're confessing it, God wants to free you of it. And sometimes God will just say, poof, gone. But oftentimes God invites you hand in hand with him to walk it out and do the hard work with him as he eliminates it from your life. So my encouragement to you is to maybe take some time to write down and pray, like, God, what are those breadcrumbs that lead to the thing I totally don't want to do? Because so often you're already way down that path before you even realize, but God can reveal those things to you, and that is definitely part of freedom. So this is how we'll end. There is in your outline on the back, it says pray together. I would love it if you would just gather up. You don't need to confess all your deep, dark secrets and sins right here. We believe that we have access straight to God. If you feel compelled, like you want to share something in confidence, I would love to talk to you, and I'd love to pray for you. These prayers are an invitation for you to pray for things like just the courage to accept the conviction for your sin. To just say, like, you know what? That's not a bad choice. That wasn't like my bad, bro. That was a sin. I'm just going to call it that. Maybe just pray for somebody that would be accountability to you, and maybe that you need to grow in your trust that God really actually wants to deliver it for you. But why don't we take 4 or 5 minutes just to pray together? I know we're at a little over 7:30 already, but I think we're good for it. Why don't we pray for a handful of minutes, and then I'll come up in 4 or 5 minutes, and I'll just pray over the microphone as kind of our exit. But why don't we gather back in our groups and pray together?